I'm reading the wrong menu. Let me try this again. Okay, y'all. Here we go. Let me try this again. This is the Joint Planning and Zoning Committee and Special Call Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, January 11th. We have one case today, so the meeting is called to order, and the only other item of business is approval of the minutes of our last meeting. Have members had time to read through those minutes? Okay, do I hear a motion for approval?
Move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. It has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor and ayes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So that is attended to, and now we have our rezoning case, CAC 2022-00006. Who is going to read our case for us? It's a competition here.
All right, this is ZAC 2022-6 in the Inslee Highlands neighborhood. It's a request to rezone from B2 General Business District to I1 Light Manufacturing District, and it's been filed by Don Cosper on behalf of the owner, Stephen Bailey, and it's located at 2509 Inslee Avenue West. It's an application to change zone district boundaries from B2 General Business District to I1 Light Manufacturing District in order to use this parcel as a parking lot for commercial vehicles awaiting repair. So the proposed use is a parking lot for commercial vehicles in line for repair and those waiting to be picked up after repairs or tires are completed by Tire Tech. The subject property sits on approximately 0.14 acres of land, currently zoned C2 General Commercial District, and properties abutting the subject property to the north, south, and east are also zoned C2 General Commercial District, and the properties to the west are zoned D3 Single Family District. The applicant's proposal is to use the lot as a parking lot for commercial vehicles that are waiting to be repaired and those that have already been repaired and are waiting to be picked up. Repairs and tire replacements are performed across the street in Tire Tech's building located at 2400 Inslee Avenue West. The city's adopted long-range land use plan identifies the property as C2 General Commercial, and the applicant is requesting to rezone to I1 Light Manufacturing. Light manufacturing allows for light manufacturing and office uses, and uses in this district include warehouse and distribution uses, urban agriculture and supporting uses, such as minor retail and services to support the major uses. No residential uses are allowed in this district. If this rezoning were to be approved, the applicant is required to install a C standard buffer where the I1 is abutting the D3 single-family residential district, and to bring the rest of the applicant's business into compliance with the current zoning ordinance, a C standard buffer is recommended where C2 general commercial is abutting any D3 single-family residential properties. All landscaping must comply with the requirements in our zoning ordinance. Staff has recommended queue conditions for this property, and those are listed on page 14. Number 1, queues out any uses that would not be recommended for the property, and number 2 is no work to be performed outdoors. The Inslee Highlands Neighborhood Association met on April 25th, 2022 to review the proposed project and voted to not support the proposed rezoning request. The vote was 4 not to support and 2 to support. The neighborhood is not supportive of the rezoning request because neighbors do not want trucks parked on the parking lot at all. The traffic of trucks will mess up their streets, especially Pike Road, and neighbors are concerned with the presentation, high traffic of trucks, and the overall look entering the neighborhood. They do not see this business as being good neighbors. They do not want a junkyard off Inslee Avenue. If the rezoning request were to be approved, the neighborhood has requested more lighting, well-kept landscaping, and a neighborhood welcome sign installed at the Inslee 5 Points West Avenue entrance. Additional neighborhood residents have contacted staff with additional concerns, such as the applicant is performing work outdoors, specifically sandblasting and painting, and it is hard to breathe outside during business hours. The applicant is storing tires outdoors in the open elements. The applicant is storing commercial truck scrap outdoors. Per the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, scrap tires must be stored in the proper dumpsters, and per the city ordinance, these dumpsters must be enclosed and notated on a submitted site plan. No scrap tires may be exposed to the elements for more than 30 days, and they should be disposed of within that time frame. Anyone exposing scrap tires to the elements for more than 7 days must develop and implement a vector control plan, which must be approved by ADEM. There are no other industrial properties anywhere in Inslee Highlands. This is a quiet family neighborhood with homes and neighborhood businesses, and we do not want pollution in our neighborhood. Why does this business need to rezone in our neighborhood? Why is it not already somewhere that allows the industrial use? Our elderly people do not deserve this health hazard. A wooden fence is not going to work. We would prefer a metal fence to help keep down the loud noise. It will reflect the noise. An 8-foot wooden fence is just like putting up a piece of plastic. The order says no taller than a 12-foot fence, so what we want is a 10-foot metal fence. This property is located within the Western Framework Plan area, and this framework plan was adopted in August of 2017, and an implementation committee has been formed. The implementation committee also provided comments. They said, "We are opposed to allow any spot zoning to permit the change from C2 to industrial usage. This change will open the door to allow businesses to bring in things that will affect our atmosphere and impacts our quality of life for the overall community. This business has been operating illegally against the current zoning, and this is our gateway to 5 Points West. We are asking you to please oppose this zoning change so that we do not go against the current zoning and the future land use, which we desire to keep intact with the future land use plan." The Zoning Advisory Committee met at its regularly scheduled meeting on August 2nd, 2022, to review the rezoning request and voted to send it to the Planning and Zoning Committee with no recommendation. The Planning and Zoning Committee met at its regularly scheduled meeting on September 14th, 2022, and requested that the applicant return to the Inslee Highlands neighborhood to reach a solution that benefits all parties. The Inslee Highlands Neighborhood Association met at its regularly scheduled meeting on January 9th, 2023, and voted again to not support the rezoning request. The neighborhood is not supportive of the request because of the following reasons. The current upkeep of the property is not beneficial to the neighborhood. There will be potential damage to streets from the large trucks, and no changes have been done during this rezoning process. We would like to see improvements without the rezoning of the property. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, and we are first going to hear from the applicants to hear what they have done since our last meeting, and then we will hear from the residents for their comments about what has been done since our last meeting. So, who is going to be the speaker representing the owner? Both of you? Tag team. Okay, well, come on up. Tell us your names and addresses. And
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairman, my name is Trip Galloway. I represent Mr. Bailey, and Mr. Cosper will be doing the bulk of the presentation. If I may, for a point of clarification, I think it's procedurally appropriate for me to ask the chair. There was a comment from staff about an ask from the neighborhood that a fence not be 8-foot wooden, and it could be 12 feet in height, but the ask was that it would be a 10-foot metal fence instead. So that we know what that ask is, could the staff clarify, Madam Chair, what the staff understands that fence is? Is that a fence on the subject property, and/or is it a fence on the property that's not at issue before this board, if that's an ask relative to the property where the existing facility is? Because some of the asks have been relative to the existing facility, so that we know how to respond and absorb and appreciate that comment. It would be helpful if that could be clarified.
Does the staff have a clarification?
Yes. There was a ZBA case done in 2018 that required the applicant to install a solid fence barrier around the main property. So that main property is not within this rezoning request, but that will be a zoning enforcement issue that the city will have to follow up with. But from the neighborhood standpoint, I believe that they would like the 12-foot solid steel fence around the main property so that they do not have to look at it. And they would also like the parking lot to have a taller solid fence so that they do not have to look at the commercial trucks across the street.
Okay. I heard 12 feet there when I'd heard 10 feet before. Is there a numerical height attributable for the subject property that is different than the numerical height for the presently operating facility?
No, I would recommend going with whatever height the neighborhood would like. I believe that we have an 8-foot cap on our fence ordinance, and so you would need a fence variance, but that would not be difficult to obtain.
Okay, I would say on behalf of Mr. Bailey, he is willing to reasonably address fence issues. There has been extensive dialogue at the September meeting. Mr. Cosper at the time was on the board that addressed the fence and had an independent recollection of that. So we feel like we're conforming, but we're willing to have fencing, appropriate fencing, be a part of conditions on this. And so I'm not trying to be cute, but I also would like to know with some certainty what would be asked. So if a vote is ultimately taken that contemplates fencing as a component, I would ask that it be specified as to which property is being addressed and the height, or maybe deferring to staff on that, or whatever. So there be as much certainty attached to that element as possible. Because what I wouldn't want to do is proceed forward and us devote resources and energies to erecting a fence that we understood to be compliant, which is what happened last time, and then have others say, oh, no, that's not what it means. So I think it would be helpful to all involved, regardless of what the roles are, for there to be certainty as to fencing material, location, and height. So I offer that. But Madam Chair, in terms of the request about each group to report what has been done since the last meeting, I would like to turn over our presentation to Mr. Cosper, who can speak to this firsthand, as he attended the meeting and he's been on the front line of dealing with the city and with the neighborhood.
Thank you.
I'm Don Cosper. I live at 2803 Carlisle Road, Birmingham, Alabama. I think you've heard enough of the background about how the function works on Mr. Bailey's property, which was acquired in 2015, and he opened his business there in 2016. And we became involved in this early in 22 after he was issued a citation in late 21 for this narrow parcel, which we keep talking about this being rezoned. It is B2, and we're requesting I1. And the reason we're requesting R1, that is the suggested zoning that came from staff. We would also recommend a potential Q qualification on it that limited that to temporary holding area. I think there's a lot of fear that anything that's labeled industrial might end up with some kind of factory being there. Of course, it's a very tiny piece of property and would not be conducive to any large factory. Okay, let's pick up where we were. At their September 14th meeting, we were instructed by you all to go to the neighborhood and find out what they would like to have done in order to support this. Mr. Wilson, I believe, from the neighborhood, requested that Inslee Highlands meet once without us before we attend a meeting. And that should be on your record or the minutes from the last meeting. So after they met, and I think that would be in October, I had several attempts to get the meeting minutes, and I never received those. I was trying to prepare for our visit to them, and I never got any minutes. I was finally told that they just continued to oppose the rezoning of Parcel 1, Lot 2. They did not have a December meeting, so as directed by you all, I attended the January meeting on Monday night to present the improvements that we wish to offer. I was cut off from completing my presentation and was subjected to verbal abuse and yelling by at least 2 people in attendance, and I was told to leave and that they didn't want me back in the first place to talk about this project. One gentleman even questioned who instructed me to come back to the meeting. So I packed up my materials, I thanked them, and left. What they did was in direct contradiction of your specific instructions. We did what you asked us to do, and we're here today to offer that again, like we wished to offer them on Monday, but they would not listen. I suggest you get a recorded copy of that meeting and watch it. The president tried to maintain control, and the resource officer, Mr. Watson, and Christopher Mosley tried their best to explain to the group why we were there and what we intended to do, but I don't think anything came out of that. So I've communicated with Mr. Watson, Mr. Mosley, and Councilor Clark about this already. We've heard several different deficiencies, including the business about ADEM, and we got a commitment that they are complying with ADEM requirements, that nothing is left out there that would require spraying by ADEM's guidelines, and that they are picked up on a basis that was in the time frame that ADEM that prescribes in their requirements. In regard to Parcel 1, which is not part of the property, we're requesting that we're being rezoned. I was on the ZBA in 2018 when this electric fence was brought to the ZBA, and since they require approval from the ZBA, it came to us. Amarok was the electric fence people at the time. They were known as Guard Dog. They had been hired by Stephen Bailey to apply for, furnish, and install an electric fence around the side and back of Parcel 1, Lot 1. Piece right there. I know I need to be in the microphone, so I'm trying not to talk when I'm over there. It was in their contract to handle everything from the entire process, the application, and the installation. We heard that case at the ZBA, and it was presented to us at the ZBA by Nikki Huggins, the Amarok applicant, who is their compliance officer for Amarok. At that time, another member of the ZBA and I discussed the need for an 8-foot tall opaque fence. And this condition was added to the fence approval that was granted, and it was outlined in a letter to Nikki Huggins at Amarok from Tom McGee, who was on the zoning staff at the time. Since Amarok was the applicant, Mr. Bailey, nor any of us on the ZBA were ever copied on any further correspondence about that. When we discovered that the current existing expanded metal material was granted when the applicant, Amarok Fence, negotiated the use of this material as an alternate that they've used in other locations. They negotiated this with the director of planning, engineering, and permits at the time, Andre Bidas, and he and the inspector approved the current fence as an acceptable alternate. Mr. Bailey was never aware that Amarok had changed the material, nor were we at the ZBA, and that it was approved. What we'd like to do is propose back to an 8-foot or whatever height that we deem appropriate, opaque fence that's part of what we originally asked for in the ZBA in 2018. In addition to the barrier fence, to the opaque fence, we're also showing a type C3 landscape buffer along Avenue Q. You can see the green on there. That's where the landscape buffers would be. Along Avenue Q, it would be 12 trees, 6 understory trees, and 48 shrubs. And then if we go on to parcel 2, the one that we're requesting rezoning, we're seeking to remove the existing chain link fence that was put there during the Jim Limbaugh car dealership era and install a similar opaque fence around that, except for at the entrance drive along Inslee Avenue and Pike Road and the Q sides, with a C3 buffer on the Q end and a C1 buffer along the Inslee Avenue, which a C3 is 6 trees, 3 understory trees, 24 shrubs. A C1 is 5 trees, 3 understory trees, and 19 shrubs. The choice of this is prescribed in the zoning book. We talked to staff about which buffers to use, so we didn't just inadvertently choose the buffer. We followed the directions given by them and in the zoning book. In each of these cases, Tire Tech will water and maintain the landscape material, and we feel like that with the fencing, the landscape material, new lighting in the areas which they wanted to illuminate, new lighting in the alley, which Mr. Bailey has no access to whatsoever, and the new welcome sign along Inslee Avenue would provide a safer, softer, and more pleasant screen from the street and the adjacent neighborhood. And it also provide an attractive edge along Inslee Avenue for people as they come off the freeway and enter into the area. So we respectfully request that you will vote to recommend this parcel, Lot 2, with a potential consideration of the Q condition that only allows it to be used as a temporary holding lot. So I'm happy to answer any further questions you might have.
Do any members of the committee have any questions at this point?
We can hear from the remaining parties.
Okay.
Personally.
Well, we don't have any questions at this point in time, so we'll ask some questions after we hear from everyone else. So if y'all just have a seat on the front row. Thank you. Now, this is a public hearing. If there are members of the public here, and I see that there are, who wish to speak, if you would come forward and give your name and address and say your piece, and you'll have 3 minutes to do so.
Good evening, Madam Chair. I'm Wayne Wilson, President-elect, 2023 Inslee Highland neighborhood. I reside at 1712 33rd Street in Inslee Highland. And we've been here, I think this makes the 4th time we've been here, if not 5. This company has been there since 2015. There were some requests that was asked by the city. A fence. My neighbors say that they got ties out there, and in the summer mosquitoes are real bad. When the fumes from the truck, my neighbors there say there's a problem. I talked to 3 or 4 of the neighbors on the other day, and they say sometimes the tractors be out there and it's blocking, they can't get in the yard. So we just been trying to get some things done. When it first came up, I personally said it was an eyesore when you come off the interstate, and a lot of people coming off the interstate going to the cross plates or whatever, to see all these tractor trailers out there. And in the yard, it looked just like a junkyard. On the back side is just a lot of beat up trucks or whatever. In that parking lot, the ground has been holes in the ground. And I was saying, like, if we allowed this to happen, well, if they had done what they were saying they were going to do, because this council, I think the council told them before, y'all said y'all were going to do something and hadn't done anything. They were going to put barriers up and do some things, but nothing has been done to now. And my neighbors, like I say, one of them told me, said, when them trucks put off them fumes, you can smell it, and we don't know what's coming off of it. But there's just a lot of things that we in our meeting, we tried to be polite as possible. At least I tried to be as courteous as we could be. But one thing, what I say that since 2015, nothing, not a flower, not nothing has been done. And we've been here 3 or 4 times. One meeting we was here, and they walked off, and we was left here. The last meeting, we had been here through about 3 or 4 cases. We've been here about 3 hours, and we're just about to be looked over. But then we did get a chance to speak. But these were just some of the things that we were concerned with. And just to say that I was told that if we allow this company to come with that, every other company in this, that wants to bring something to our neighborhood was going to come. And the neighbors, what they are saying, some of them, the more they get there, they're going to push our neighbors out of the community. Pike Road, there's about 6, 7 homes there. And they won't even have nowhere to go. They're going to put them out of there was an apartment there, and nobody's been in their apartments for 5 years. But these were just some of the things that we were saying, and we just want to get the respect from the council, the city, the Inslee Highland neighborhood. We want to grow. We got a lot of growing coming on in the Crossplex area, and we want to make it look good. So this was just some of the requests that we had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Wilson before he gets away? Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
Afternoon.
My name is David Eldridge. I reside at 2605 Avenue S, as in Sam, right by Minor Elementary School. Go Minor. On Pike Road, where this business is located, our kids walk that street coming to school. And this particular business, they have their trucks parked everywhere. And the trailers, they park them on that lot. You can't, for kids to be walking that street, anybody can do anything. And I hate if that happened to one of our kids. 20th Street is the gateway to the Crossplex. That's a beautiful sight. The city invested a lot of money in it. And this business right here is taking down the property value in our community. As I come home in the evening, I get off 20th Street all happy. I'm coming home to my beautiful house, and I see this. You wouldn't want to stay next to this. There's trailers left open. The back of them are left open. Some have tires on them, some do not. There's a stack of tires over in the corner. And like Mr. Wilson said, that's a gathering place for mosquitoes and all kind of critters. This is not what we want in Inslee Highland. This is not what we asked for our city to give us. And we're asking our city right now, we need our leaders to stand behind us and tell this particular business, no, we're not rezoning. There's other industrial places that you can go in the city and you can do what you need in those particular areas. But in our neighborhood, in our community, our pride and joy in Inslee Highland, we do not want to rezone this. Leave it as it is, and this business can't get along, they need to find another spot. That's my 3 minutes. Thank y'all. You have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Next speaker. Okay, well, it appears that there are no other speakers. Do members of the committee have any questions to ask of the applicants or any comments?
Yeah, I remember this item coming, and I guess for me, the original agreement to put a fence up, I believe, like there was a couple of things. I think it was largely centered around a fence associated with the original application that didn't get done initially. It sounds like there's been no action on that yet, and so that was just kind of my main concern. Is we already had an agreement in place and didn't follow through with that. I'm thinking that goes back to 2018, and so just concerned about going forward, following through with this piece as well. So,
Do you wish to answer?
I would respectfully respond that I think what transpired was a fence was constructed based on what was approved by the city, that there wasn't a bait and switch where X was approved and then Y got constructed. And the verbiage is I won't say tricky, but it is not precise in what was approved by the BZA, and so what was presented by the fence company to the city is in compliance with what the BZA said, this is what we want, and the city administrators looked at it and said, that is okay. So if in fact now in hindsight, the legislative body of the city says we disagree with the steps taken by our administrative people, then that is probably within the prerogative of the legislative body, but I think it would be inappropriate to say that we didn't do what we were supposed to do because we acted in conformity with what the administrative folks said you could do. And if that is now, and sometimes, things evolve, and what was sufficient at one time and then 5 years down the road is not sufficient, then perhaps it's time, as has been offered by Mr. Cosper, to reconstruct the fence. And so we haven't done anything since September because everything's in flux now. There is an express and committed willingness to deal with the fence. And so I'm talking now about the fence on the property not at issue, which one could argue is outside the scope of whether the subject property should be rezoned. We're willing, as a good faith measure, to pledge and commit to do that. And we also invite guidance on the fencing requirement on the new property so we don't run into confusion again like has happened here. So I feel like we've got clean hands on the fence, and we're willing to do what is required, and we did what was directed by the administrative. And I would think that the city doesn't want people to go rogue and do things in contravention to what the administration says to do. So anyway, that's my response, and I apologize if we haven't clarified and set the table to articulate our position on that issue.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to point out on page 8 that the conditions of that 2018 ZBA case are there. Number 4 is that the owner must install a solid fence barrier no less than 8 feet in height on the subject property facing the residential areas along Avenue Q and 26th Street. The applicant has referenced that letter that he mentioned, but they have not been able to produce that to city staff, and no one at City Hall can corroborate that that letter exists. So that fence was never approved by city staff, and it was not permitted.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Councilor Tate?
I just have comments, Councilor Abbott, and I have to, concur with Councilor Woods, and, looking through the photos and all of the violations that I continue to see, and just listening to what both of the neighborhood residents said, when I think about and what I'm seeing on these photos and what's currently happening in St. Clair County with the environmental issue that's going on there, and people having to adapt to, what is currently going on there. And also the comment that was made about, the trucks that have bays that are being open, kids are passing through going to school. And I just saw a news report this morning where some teenagers were sex trafficked in Jasper. And so I think about all of that and the safety concerns and share the concerns of the residents. And, just wanting to know what has delayed the applicant from doing the things that they, were told to do to bring the property, in compliance. So I do share the sentiments, and once again, when I look at what's going on in St. Clair County with that environmental issue, I see where, the residents have some grave concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Cosper?
We do have permits for that fence. We have copies of it. I got them off of the city site, so the permits are there. What is not there is documentation where Andre Vitas approved the alternate material. I just wanted to clarify that point. Also, I want to make sure I understand the point about the children walking past there, and I think that's an important one. It's significant. But I think you need to be aware that all of the bays in which they work on the trucks, whether they're open when they're working on them or closed, are all inside the security fence. There's no bay that is open that you could walk into without being inside the security fence. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 points. And I think they're important points, including the point about the air quality. Of course, Jim Limbaugh worked on cars at the same facility in the same buildings for 20 or 30 years before Mr. Bailey bought it. Certainly his work is probably a little bit more offensive than when you're working on a car. But it's a concern of ours, and we're hoping that with a fence height that we can agree on, we have to be careful about that, because a 12-foot high metal fence is typically what you see along highways, not in an urban area, and it can create 12-foot high is approximately the height of this right here, and that could create the feeling of a canyon around it, which would be a very negative feeling. Also, when you're putting a 12-foot solid fence up, you have some significant wind loads that have to be considered for it too. So we want to put an opaque barrier. There's no doubt about that. I just want to be careful about what we put as a condition, and we're willing to go along with those conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask
Madam Chair, let me make another quick comment.
Okay.
Let me let the record reflect when I say and make a correction. And what I was referencing was the back of a trailer and the truck doors are being open. So I want the record to reflect that as well. Trucks that are parked on the streets with the doors of the back of the truck being open. So I want to make that correction.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the staff on page 4 of 8 of our committee agenda for today. It talks about the business license situation, and it says that the business license, the 215C business license that allowed working on vehicles both indoors and out in the open air, that violated the applicant's legal non-conforming status.
Yes. So when Tire Tech moved to this location, I believe their original location was on 31st Avenue or somewhere over towards that area in Inslee. And this type of operation was allowed because they were in an M2 heavy industrial district. They moved to this new location on Inslee 5 Points West that is zone C2. And a outdoor heavy truck repair business is not allowed. So they were allowed to get a business license because it has to be a 215B that only permits work to be done indoors. They then went online in 2019 and changed their business license from a 215B to a 215C that allows work on commercial vehicles to be performed indoors and outdoors. So we let them know if they're going to be performing work outdoors, then that violates their legal non-conforming status. So as of June 2022, they had changed their business license back to a 215B.
So how many years did they operate illegally? Or in violation of their legal non-conforming use?
I believe it was about 2 to 3 years.
Okay. So what is the legal non-conforming status of this property? That's the part I'm having a...
So since the Don Drennan business was there, it was like an automobile repair shop, but they were performing all work indoors. So that's why we would consider a business doing the same thing to be legal non-conforming, because now if they were to move there tomorrow, we would not allow this business there, but it would be considered legal non-conforming since Don Drennan was there for so long. But they have to do all of their work indoors. And the neighborhood has told us that they do not do all of their work indoors. But that's what the neighborhood says. But they also changed their business license online to do work outdoors. So there is evidence there that they have been doing work outdoors.
Okay. Well, this is what I think. I think that the owner of this business may have chosen the wrong location for the type of business that he's operating. And possibly it would be wise to find some property that is zoned appropriately for what he wants to do, rather than subjecting the neighborhood to all of this constant turmoil. I mean, if I'd come to City Hall 4 or 5 times for the same issue, I believe I'd be kind of irritated with City Hall. And I'm sure everybody in here just about is. But there are too many violations. There's too little attention to the law. There's too little attention to doing what's right. And the proposed rezoning request is not consistent with the newly adopted long-range land use plan. So my policy as a city councilman has been not to vote for things that were in violation of our own long-range land use plan, especially since we finally have revised it over the last, 5 years now, where we have a long-range land use plan that actually means something. So I simply cannot support this rezoning because, for these reasons, I don't feel like, the in good faith means something to me that's obviously a little bit different from this property owner. I don't see much good faith going on around here. And I think I'll just stop right there. So, if members of the committee have any further comments or opinions to state, and if, Mr. Cosper, if you have any kind of comment to make, that's fine. We're ready to hear those comments because I think we are getting close to being ready to make a decision.
No, I don't personally have any further comments.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee and non-members of the committee, any? Okay, so do we have a motion?
Yeah, I move we send this to the full council with the recommendation to not approve.
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded that we send this to the full council with our recommendation not to approve it. All in favor say aye. 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 All opposed, obviously, that was unanimous, so we have no opposition. So that case is decided and it will go to the full council for consideration. And I'm sure y'all will be back here for a 6th time, and then it will be over.
May I ask a question? What is the timeline? I know that you have to send out notices for the council hearing, and what is the timeline for that?
The staff will answer that question.
We have to advertise for 4 weeks, so this will probably go to the full city council in about 5 weeks.
Okay, that was my expectation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And our last item on our agenda is old and new business. Does anyone have any old and new business?
No, ma'am.
Well, I've got some new business,
Okay.
actually, if you don't mind. And that's the reason Dr. O'Quinn is here. There had been some questions previously at a previous.
About our old new business, and we don't know about our old.
Thought you
new
wanted to
business?
just come hang out, man. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was going to offer some new business if you'd like.
What is our new business?
So our new business is just to talk real briefly about an ordinance that we've been working on that we intend to propose some amendments to the zoning ordinance that would deal with conservation districts and an open space overlay. So kind of quickly, the idea here is to create zoning districts that we could rezone certain properties to that would offer kind of a further level of protection, so that all city parks could be rezoned to an open space district that we're calling, neighborhood greenway district. Currently, city parks, are zoned a whole bunch of different things. And so I think, it kind of creates an intent, to protect the park, but it also creates another layer of public scrutiny if something were to be proposed on a property that's a public park that may not be dedicated. Obviously, if a park is dedicated, you have a referendum process that you'd have to go through to do something on there differently. But if there may be parks in the city that are not dedicated, and so we rezone all our parks to an open space district that, severely restrict, what can be done there, just to park uses, generally speaking. And so if somebody were to want, or the city were to sell a property, somebody wanted to do something on there, it would have to go through some scrutiny, in public, to be rezoned, basically. Likewise, there's an open space, kind of a regional park district that we want to create for unique parks like Ruffner or for Red Mountain Park or potentially for the zoo, although I think, I don't know, potentially we could zone the zoo that way as well. But, the idea being that a regional park is going to have different types of uses, different kinds of activities that may include some commercial activity. And so we want to make that, available in those places, but we want to provide some scrutiny on that. And I think that this ordinance, that scrutiny would come through the Planning Commission, so that if somebody were going to propose some sort of use that would be commercial, it'd have to go through Planning Commission in order for that to be approved. But you can think that, if you think about the zoo has got a cafe or a restaurant or something like that.
Shop, where
gift
you can buy
shops,
stuffed animals.
those kinds of things. Exactly. So that's the.
Botanical Gardens, I believe, has a gift shop. And the, the zoo, Vulcan, and
Sure.
the Botanical Gardens all have gift shops.
Right.
And all have, so therefore.
So they would need to have that allowed, those are allowed uses, basically. And so that's kind of the idea with this regional park, that's different than a typical neighborhood park. And then likewise, we would create an open space district that would be, open space natural area, so this is more about conservation. And so this is about those properties that surround Lake Purdy, properties that are owned by Birmingham Waterworks Board, that have an easement placed on them right now that, better or worse is being contested. So we want to, and we had the intent to do this as part of our comprehensive plan, to identify, and the comprehensive plan did identify those areas, those properties that surround Lake Purdy as conservation areas. And so we want to kind of codify that, by creating a special district that we could apply to those areas. Currently, a lot of those properties are zoned holding zone. And so they really need to be rezoned to a district, but we really don't have a district that fits them well, aside from agriculture. And so, we want to create a district that makes sense for that, conservation use. And they would be able to do certain things like, on occasion, they have to do some forest maintenance, maybe they get a bug blight or something like that. They got to take out dead species, replant trees. That's the kind of activity that we envision there. And of course there's the lake there, and people have, use the lake for recreational purposes, those sorts of things. So that's one piece of this is, creating these new zoning districts, that we would actually apply to the zoning map for parks, regional parks, and then the conservation areas around.
So has any work been actually done to create these, or is this something we are contemplating?
No, we have a draft. I'm reading from a draft now.
Oh, maybe we could be provided with a copy of it.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I don't think that's. I don't think that would be a problem. But we'll we'll be going to a stakeholder group and then
have it.
Yeah, well, we can do that.
Does this seem odd to you? Seems odd to me.
Well, it's something that we have developed and we're ready to move forward with. I think that what's precipitated this was the comments that were made at council that day about certain things. And it's like, oh, well, we can respond to that by letting them know that this is out there and it's coming. And so, obviously we're going to be working with the Planning and Zoning Committee as this moves forward. We're going to have a stakeholder group, that sort of thing. There'll need to be, currently, it's a working draft. And so we're going to have to meet with a stakeholder group. We're going to have to meet with counselors. And there'll be adjustments potentially that'll made.
Has the law department already reviewed it?
They have not. No, we typically will give it to them when there's sort of a final draft, that we feel like we're ready to move forward with. We'll give it to them 30 days for review from their point of view.
I personally think that controlling the waterworks property, since they refuse to do it, they refuse to protect our water, it seems to me that it would be good for us to take care of it in some way. So I'm in favor of this. I think this is a back-assward way to do it, considering that the committee, up until this point, doesn't know anything. But,
well, we're here briefing you on it now.
We're at City Hall, so back-assward is pretty much normal.
Okay. So the second part of it is what we're calling a natural resource protection overlay. And so this would be an overlay, as part of the zoning ordinance, that would create special requirements, development standards for properties that are adjacent to creeks, adjacent to Lake Purdy, steep slopes, and wetlands. And so for streams, there would be three different types of buffers that were three different types of buffers that would be created. And so there would be one buffer that would be created that would be 500 feet from either Lake Purdy or Cahaba River or the Little Cahaba. In those cases, certain uses would not be allowed, right? So a gas station, within 500 feet, of a stream that contributes to Lake Purdy, we would say those are not permitted uses. Okay, and then I guess there's actually one other piece to it. If you're any property that's within the basin of Lake Purdy or Little Cahaba River, there would be certain uses that would not be allowed at all. So like, you wanted to do a junkyard, you want to do some kind of heavy industrial use, those sorts of things would be strictly prohibited, within both basins. And those are, like I say, they're really severe, kind of really intense uses, like heavy industrial uses. But then, like I say, the 500-foot buffer would create a lower standard of prohibitions for certain uses like gas stations within 500 feet of Cahaba River or Lake Purdy. And then beyond that, you would have a 100-foot creek bank buffer for those same streams, where you would limit development within 100 feet of the river. And not only that, but there would have to be a buffer that's either planted or one that's existing. So, if you had somebody that came in, was going to do a development on a piece of property, they've got frontage on Cahaba River, the 100 feet that's adjacent to the river would not be allowed to be developed, and it would have to either be planted with specific plants that are listed in here, or the existing plant material could remain if they're not invasive species. So a 100-foot buffer of privet would not count. The privet would have to come out, and good species would have to go in. And then likewise, let me see, I think, right. So the other major creeks like 5 Mile, Village Creek, Valley Creek would have to 50-foot buffer that would be similar. So you have a 50-foot, both of those, all of our streams, I think, within the city are impaired or have total maximum daily loads. And so, it makes sense to create some protection for those streams to limit, those problems that we already have. And so Village, Valley, 5 Mile, Shades Creek would all have a 50-foot buffer requirement. Similarly, no development within 50 feet, buffer is required. If it's invasive, it's got to go away. We got to have good species back in there. But if there are good species there now, they could account for a buffer. They just wouldn't be just.
Can we not double those buffers? Those seem like
you could, but I think
shallow
that
buffers.
For what's that?
seem like very shallow buffers. I mean, 50 feet is...
Well, from our research, I think that's what makes sense. I mean, we've looked at other cities, EPA, different places, and that's what we felt like made sense to us. Once again, that's all up for discussion. We're going to have stakeholder meetings and talk about that. So, those are the stream bank buffers, and then similarly, where there are wetlands that are identified, there would be buffers for those. And then the steep slope provision requires certain development practices on slopes between 15 and 25%. So, certain grading techniques, having to, complete work in a certain amount of time, not leaving it exposed for a long amount of time, those sorts of things. And all those regulations are listed in here. And so anything in between 15 and 25 would have special regulations there. And then if that's for commercial, well, that's for any property. And then if it's a residential property that's being developed in between 15 and 25%, this ordinance would require that they use our conservation subdivision in the zoning ordinance that would preserve a portion of the site in a natural state in exchange for density bonuses. So they could get the same type of density out of the site, but they'd have to preserve a certain portion of the site to protect the steep slope. And so that's a requirement that's in here as well. And then the last thing I would mention is that anything over 25%, there would be just a prohibition on development, period. And so if you look at a slope map of the city, you're not going to find any development on a slope over 25% presently, because it's just impractical. I mean, I guess you possibly could do something, but, the cost to overcome that, would not be worth it. And so, we feel like 25% and above is a good place, to create a stopping point for development. And that would, protect very steep slopes from development. And so, that's kind of what the ordinance says at this point in time. Like I say, this is a draft that's been created by staff, for the reasons we've talked about. And, next steps are to, engage a stakeholder group, engage P&Z, and move forward, from there through an adoption process.
And have the Planning and Zoning Committee actually read the ordinance.
Of course. Yeah, that's what I said. The next step would be, to engage stakeholders and counselors.
Okay, well, we'll be happy to put it on our next agenda if it's ready.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not ready to move forward to adoption, no. So, but I think for, we need to figure out a strategy for, creating maybe a working meeting or something like that, I think would be a way to go. And then, we could have in tandem stakeholder group meeting, kind of simultaneously. But I think all of that, would need to go through, our director and GA, for guidance on the proper, way to move forward.
But you are going to send it to us to read.
Yes,
TBD.
Of course.
Good. Dr. O'Quinn, you seem to have all the cards, so have at it.
Well, I got the ordinance from your chief of staff, so Tim didn't send it to me. I got it from Darrell Lee.
Guys.
So my question is on the how a steep slope is defined, because gradient can be determined over 10 feet or 100 feet. So what defines, what is the standard?
Yeah, well, for us, it would be, a topographic map, rise over run, so it's, it's just a math problem, and so we would use our GIS system to create a slope map. We've got 1 foot contours for the entire city. We would run through, some processing to create a slope map, and it's just rise over run,
But what I'm saying is they, take just your average parcel. There's going to be a lot of variation in the slope even within the parcel.
Sure.
So I mean, what I'm looking at is that I see a lot of green space on Red Mountain specifically, and I'm sure there's other places around the city that haven't been developed, but, you know, I'm thinking in particular on Red Mountain in the vicinity of the JCC and Montclair Hospital. There's probably at least 200 acres of forest on the south slope, and there's it's become sort of a well, the JCC, you know, actually has designated it, you know, recreational space for their membership. But some, you know, the other area, specifically behind Montclair Hospital, you know, has been sort of become, you know, bootleg recreational trails, you know, whatever you want to call it. And so it's sort of a unsanctioned amenity for the surrounding community, especially. But you know, I know folks that come from other parts of the metro area to utilize that space too. So, you know, ultimately, I would like to see us, you know, preserve those types of green spaces and you know, the big question about all of this, even the water conservation measures, is, you know, what does the law allow us to do without it being considered a taking? You know, what's the threshold that we can go up to that the owner doesn't have grounds to sue the city over the ordinance?
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, you know, obviously we'll go through OCA review. I mean, that is going to be a concern. You know, I don't know, you know, I haven't done any research about other legal cases that are out there, but I do know that there are a lot of ordinances that are very similar around the country. So, you know, I don't know if they've been challenged. I don't know if they've lost. I don't know if they've been challenged and survived. We will have to do that research.
Okay.
Especially in the 11th Circuit.
Yeah. And, you know, again, we can only do what the law allows us to do. But,
that's right.
You know, if I'm just like looking at, you know, aerial maps, you know, Red Mountain specifically, you know, you can just about envision a green, you know, a natural corridor along the ridge of Red Mountain, all the way from Red Mountain Park to Eastwood, and maybe even, you know, with some small gaps all the way to Ruffner, really. Yeah. There's only a couple of places where you have breaks, and, you know, this is probably some healthy dose of idealism in this, but, you know, I think that's kind of cool, and something that we should consider, you know, protecting. So, in any case, you know, I think determining, you know, where the boundary is, where the legal boundary is, you know, and thus informing us as to how much, you know, we can write into the ordinance in terms of protection. Because, you know, I agree with Councilor Abbott, like 50 foot, you know, is a pretty modest barrier for some of our waterways. But at the same time, I'm thinking about places like Griffin Creek, you know, over on the border of Homewood, where the, you know, property owner, not in the not so distant past, was proposing to build, you know, self-storage on that lot, and, you know, yet there's a creek running through the lot. So, obviously, something that would protect that waterway would likely be in conflict with the property owner's desire to, utilize the property in the way he wanted to. So anyway, I'm just a few issues I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, and we're going to have to think through those. Yeah, like I say, we will definitely need to review with OCA. If it's a blue line stream, they got to get permitted from the Corps of Engineers. So there are other protections out there.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
Okay, anything else that we'd like to have as new business before we go? Or old business?
I'll hold on to it.
Either one. Okay, so I think we're pretty close to ready to adjourn this meeting, and I would ask if if we can, number one, have a copy of the draft of this ordinance sent to the committee members, and then also if we can put it on our agenda for next meeting in case we have questions we'd like to ask about it.
Excellent.
Other than that, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Has been moved and properly seconded.